My parents told me to move out of my own house after losing $580,000 on my brother. I thought they were desperate. Then I discovered they had already tried to borrow $310,000 against my property using a signature I never made. And that was only the beginning, because someone had been targeting my house long before my parents ever asked me to leave. If you were in my position, would you protect your family or protect your home first? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe if you want to hear how I uncovered the truth. The first thing my mother said when she walked into my kitchen was, "You need to move out." I had been home for less than 5 minutes. My name is Stella Lauron. I was 34, a civil engineer, and had spent 8 years paying for the 3-bedroom house in Belmere that my parents now treated like an emergency family resource. I bought it myself and kept every mortgage statement in my office. My mother, Mireille, stood beside the island. My father, Oren, sat with the brown folder. Neither had called before coming. I put my work bag down. "How did you get in?" Mom hesitated. "You gave us a key. 2 years ago." Dad looked toward the hallway. "I thought you had the same lock." "I changed it in June." The silence told me they had not come through the front door. I looked at the back entrance. "Who let you in?" Mom ignored me. "We need to talk about something serious." "That usually means someone needs money." Dad opened the folder. "We're in trouble." I pulled out a chair but did not sit. "How much?" Dad answered. "We lost $580,000. For a moment, I thought he was exaggerating. Then I noticed his hands. They were shaking. "On Cashin?" Neither answered. They did not have to. My younger brother, Cashin Lauron, had always been the family project. He was 31 and had started several businesses. A restaurant failed, an online furniture company collapsed, and then he launched a medical transportation company that our parents called his last chance. Apparently, it had done the opposite. "When?" I asked. "Over the last 18 months, Dad said. I stared at him. "You lost that much and didn't tell me?" Mom's voice sharpened. "You would have told us to stop." "Yes. That is why." They had hidden the disaster because they knew I would tell them to stop. I looked at the folder again. "What does this have to do with my house?" Dad pushed a document across the table. I recognized the address immediately. My stomach tightened. "What is this?" "A temporary arrangement." I picked it up. It was a draft power of attorney granting my parents authority over my property and finances. I looked at Mom. "No. You haven't read it." "I don't need to. You're emotional. You brought a document giving you control over my house into my house without asking me." Mom folded her arms. "Your father and I are trying to protect the family." "From what?" "From losing everything." I set the paper down. "You already lost everything you chose to risk." Dad stood. "Cashin still has a chance." I looked at him. "So do I." Mom's expression hardened. "You don't understand. Cashin has creditors." "Then Cashin can deal with them." "He could lose his business." "He already lost it." "He could lose his future." I pointed toward the document. "And your solution is to put my future at risk?" Nobody answered. Then Dad said, "Your house has enough equity to solve the immediate problem." There it was. They had not come to ask me to help. They had come because they had already calculated what my house was worth. "How much do you want?" Mom said, "We don't want to take the house. You brought a power of attorney." "Temporarily." "How long?" "Until Cashin stabilizes." I turned toward the window. Outside, a delivery truck passed down the street. Everything looked normal. Inside my kitchen, my parents were discussing my home like an account they could withdraw from. "How much do you want?" I asked again. Mom looked irritated. "We need enough to clear the immediate obligations." "Whose obligations?" "Cashin's." "Then why isn't Cashin here?" Dad looked away. That answer bothered me more than anything else. I walked to the table. "Where is he?" "He's handling the situation." "That's not an answer." Mom picked up her purse. "You don't need to worry about that." "I do when you're asking me to put my house up as collateral." Dad's voice became low. "Family doesn't keep score." "I do when someone wants to put my name on a debt." For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Mom said something that changed the room.
Fine.
If you won't help voluntarily, we'll have to find another way. I stared at her. What does that mean? She picked up her purse. You'll understand soon. They walked out. I locked the door behind them. It was almost 8 that evening when I noticed the folder was still on my table. I opened it again. Behind the power of attorney was another document I had not seen before. A property valuation. My house had been valued at $720,000. Under the valuation was a handwritten note, enough to clear the Loron obligations. I read it twice. Then I saw the initials.
CL.
Cashin.
He had known about this.
I called him twice. No answer. I drove to his apartment across town. His car was gone. The landlord told me Cashin had moved out 3 days earlier. Did he leave a forwarding address?
No.
I stood in the parking lot, staring at the empty space where his car should have been. 3 days. My parents had come to me tonight. Cashin had disappeared 3 days ago. That could have been coincidence. Then my phone rang. It was my bank. The woman asked whether I had recently applied for a second mortgage against my house. I stopped breathing.
No. She paused.
That's what I thought. The application was rejected, but I wanted to confirm it with you. Who submitted it? We're still reviewing that. Was my name on it? Yes. I looked back toward the road. Someone had already tried to borrow money against my house. And whoever did it had my name, my property information, and apparently a copy of my signature. My parents had not been asking me to save Cashin. They had been preparing to use my house without my permission. I stood there, wondering what frightened me more, the forged loan application or the fact that someone in my family knew enough about my finances to make it possible. Then my phone buzzed. An unknown number. One message. Stella, stop looking into the loan if you want your house to remain yours. I read it 3 times. Then another message arrived. You don't know what your parents promised. The next morning, I stopped protecting them. Before breakfast, I called the county records office and asked whether anyone had filed a lien against my property. My stomach was tight as I waited for an answer. Clerk Tamsin Reed searched my address. There is a recent filing, she said. What kind? A security interest connected to a private loan. Against my house? Yes. An hour later, she placed the certified copy before me. My name and address were listed. The amount was $310,000. Then I saw my signature. It looked like mine. I had never signed it. When was this filed? I asked. 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks earlier, I had been working 2 counties away and barely spoken to my parents. My phone rang.
Mom.
I answered. Why did you ask the bank to contact me? What are you talking about? The $310,000 loan. Silence. Then she said, Stella, listen to me.
No.
You listen. You told me you needed temporary access to my house. You didn't tell me someone had already filed a loan against it. We were trying to prevent something worse. What could possibly be worse? Cashin is in danger. Where is he? I don't know. He stopped answering us yesterday. Who is Northvale Capital? She did not answer. That was enough. You know them. We were introduced through Cashin. Then why didn't you tell me? Because you would have interfered. You're right. Stella, please come home. Your father needs to explain. I hung up. That afternoon, Julian Sorrell pulled up the rejected application. Someone had submitted my tax records, employment verification, driver's license, and an old mortgage statement. My signature had been attached electronically. Where did they get all this? I asked. We're trying to determine that. I remembered Mom had scanned my mortgage documents while helping me organize my paperwork. At the time, I trusted her. Now I felt sick. Julian turned the screen toward me. They didn't simply request a loan. What did they request? A cash-out refinance and a second lien. How much? $310,000. To consolidate your brother's debt. I left the bank and drove to my parents' house. My father opened the door. He looked exhausted. You shouldn't have come. I know. Mom was waiting in the living room. I placed the certified filing on the coffee table. Tell me everything. Dad sat down. Cashin had borrowed from several private lenders. When his company began failing, he convinced them the losses were temporary. Then the lenders demanded payment. So you used my house. We tried to, Mom said. That is not better. We didn't complete it. Because the bank rejected it. Neither corrected me. That bothered me. What aren't you telling me? Dad looked at Mom. There was another agreement. With whom? Northvale. What agreement? They promised to restructure Cashin's debts if we provided collateral. My collateral? Yes. Did Cashin know? He arranged the meeting. Where is he? We don't know. He disappeared after the lender demanded the property documents. 3 days ago? He nodded. I remembered the empty parking space outside Cashin's apartment. Something did not fit. If Cashin planned this, why would he disappear? Because he was afraid. Of Northvale? Yes. Mom reached for a folder. We found this in his apartment. Inside were loan agreements and company records. One document listed Northvale Capital's managing director, Dorian Vale. I searched his name. Former financial consultant. Lawsuits, regulatory complaints, and a bankruptcy. Why would you trust this man?
We didn't know, Dad said.
We were trying to save Cashin. I kept turning pages. Then I found a property schedule. My house was listed as asset number 7. Not under my name. Under Cashin's. Why is my house listed as his asset? She started crying. Dad answered. Cashin told us he had an agreement with you. What agreement? He said you promised to let him use the house as collateral. I never promised that. I know. Did he show you anything? Dad nodded. A message. Show me. He unlocked his phone and opened a screenshot. It showed a text conversation between me and Cashin. I can put the house up temporarily. Just make sure Mom and Dad don't know until everything is finalized. My face went numb. I had never written those words. The timestamp was 9:14 p.m. I knew exactly where I had been that night. I had been on a flight. My travel record showed that at 9:14 p.m., I had been 30,000 feet above the Atlantic. Someone had fabricated the conversation. Who else's copies of my documents? He did not answer. Mom whispered. Dorian had them. Why? He said he needed to verify the property. You gave a stranger my financial records? We thought he was helping us.
No.
You thought he was helping Cashin. She looked away. Then Dad opened another file. There is something else. It was a list of properties. 12 names. 12 houses. Every property belonged to someone connected to Cashin's businesses. My house was only one of them. How much money did Cashin really lose? Dad swallowed. We don't know. Then how did you get the 580,000 figure? My mother stopped crying. She looked at my father. We didn't calculate it. Then who did? She whispered the answer.
Dorian.
That evening, I went home. My front door was unlocked. Nothing looked disturbed. Then I noticed an envelope on my desk. No stamp, no name. Just one sentence. You should have asked what happened to the other 11 houses. Inside was a photograph of 12 houses. Mine was circled red. On the back was tomorrow's date. Under it were 3 words. Your parents know. I stood alone holding the photograph. My parents might not have started this, but they knew far more than they admitted. And someone wanted me to find out. The next morning, I stayed home with a photograph of the 12 houses spread across my kitchen table. Until that week, I had thought property records were boring. Now I understood that a house could become evidence. We checked the footage together. At 2:13 that morning, a dark sedan stopped outside my property. A person in a hood walked to the front door. The camera captured the vehicle, not the face. Mara paused the recording. Do you recognize the car? I did. It belonged to my father. My chest tightened. You think my father came here? I think your father's car came here. That isn't the same thing. She rewound the footage. The person got out carrying a small black case. Then another detail appeared. The driver's door opened. A second person remained inside. Mara looked at me. Did your father own that car when you were growing up? Yes. Who else drives it? My mother. Sometimes Cashin. The 3 of us stared at the screen. Then Mara said, Don't confront anyone yet. I nodded. 2 hours later, I was sitting in her office at the Belmere Police Department. The photograph had been scanned. Mara compared the addresses with public records. 11 of these properties have some connection to Cashin's companies, she said. But yours is different.
How?
Your property wasn't purchased through one of his companies. Exactly. She pointed to my name. That's why it's valuable. I felt angry. So they targeted me because my house was actually mine. Probably. Who are the other owners? Investors, employees, former partners, and relatives. Did they lose their houses? Not yet. Some have liens. Some have foreclosure notices. This is bigger than my parents. Yes. Then why threaten me? Because you discovered the pattern before he finished. That afternoon, I met with attorney Ivo Merrick at his office downtown. I had never used a lawyer before. I placed every document on his desk. He read the papers, then separated them into 3 piles. Identity fraud, fraudulent collateral, possible conspiracy. What does that mean for my house? It means nobody should be able to take it based on this paperwork. But we need to move quickly. How quickly? Today. He filed a fraud notice against the property and contacted my bank. Then, he asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. Did your parents ever have access to your passwords?
No.
Old passwords. I thought about it. My mother knew the password to an email account I stopped using years ago. What was in that account? Tax documents, mortgage correspondence, and scans of my driver's license. That could explain the forged signature. I felt sick. My mother had not simply known where my documents were. She may have known where my digital records were. I called her. She answered. Stella. Did you access my old email? Silence. Mom. I only looked once. When? Months ago. Why? I was trying to find your mortgage statement. For Dorian? She began crying. I didn't know what he was going to do. You gave him access. I thought he would negotiate. You knew he was using my house as collateral. I knew he wanted the property information. That's not an answer. She whispered. Cashin told me it was already agreed. I closed my eyes. Did you believe him? Yes. Why? Because he showed me the message. The fake message? I didn't know it was fake. That was the first time my mother sounded frightened rather than defensive. Where is Cashin? I don't know. Has Dorian contacted you? Another silence. Yes. When? Last night. What did he say? He said you had found the photograph. My blood went cold. How would he know? I don't know. What did he want? He wanted me to tell you to stop talking to the police. Ivo motioned for me to put the call on speaker.
I did.
Mom continued. He said if you cooperate, he can make this disappear. Ivo wrote something down. Mom, what else did he say? He said Cashin owes him. How much? Not money. What does Cashin owe him? Mom's voice broke. A list. The names of everyone who invested. Mara had told me 11 other properties were connected to Cashin. Maybe those people were targets. That evening, I drove to a storage facility outside Belmere. My father had mentioned one before, but he had never told me where it was. I found the location using an old receipt in the folder. Unit 214. The lock had already been cut. Inside were boxes of financial records. I called Mara before touching anything. She arrived with 2 officers, and we searched the unit together. There were contracts, invoices, company ledgers, and several hard drives. Then I found a blue folder.
My name was written on it.
Inside was a copy of my mortgage, a property valuation, and a photograph of my house. But beneath them was something I had never seen. A handwritten note from my father. I read it slowly. Stella must never know until Cashin is safe. I turned the page. There was a date. It was written 3 months before my parents first asked me to leave my house. Mara read it over my shoulder. Your father knew. I nodded. But the next page made my hands shake. It was a list of payments made by my parents. The total was $580,000. But the money had not gone to Cashin's medical transportation company. It had gone to 6 different companies. All 6 were controlled by Dorian Vale. I could not look away from it. Then my parents didn't lose $580,000 on Cashin.
No, she said.
They lost it on Dorian. Before we could process that, one of the officers called us over. He had found a voice recorder inside a box. It contained a single file. A man's voice spoke first.
Dorian.
You don't need Stella's permission if the paperwork looks complete. Then my mother's voice answered. But she'll find out. Dorian laughed. By then, she'll be choosing between her house and her family. The recording continued. Then another voice entered. Cashin. And he said something that changed everything. I never agreed to take Stella's house. The file ended. I looked at Mara. For the first time since this began, I knew one thing with certainty. Cashin had lied to my parents. My parents had lied to me. But Cashin might not be the person who started the plan. And somewhere in Belmere, Dorian knew we had just found the evidence that could bring him down. The recording changed the case overnight. Until then, I had been trying to protect my house from my family. Now I understood that my family had been pulled into something much larger. At 7:12 the next morning, Mara called me. Don't go anywhere alone today.
Why?
Dorian knows we have the recording.
How?
We found a message on one of the hard drives. What message? It was sent to your father. I sat up in bed. What did it say? Mara paused. Tell Stella that the recording doesn't prove what she thinks it proves. I stared at the wall. What does that mean? It means Dorian is trying to control the narrative. What narrative? We don't know yet. By 9, I was at Ivo Merrick's office. He had already reviewed the recording. There is something important here, he said. What? Cashin says he never agreed to take your house. That doesn't mean he wasn't involved in the scheme. I know, but it gives us another direction. He opened a file on his laptop. Your parents' $580,000 didn't disappear into one company. I know. It moved through 6. Dorian's companies.
Yes.
But they were not all operating at the same time. He showed me a timeline. Money entered one company, moved into another, then returned through a third. Each transfer was described as an investment, but the companies had almost no employees, no meaningful inventory, no real business activity. It was a financial structure designed to make money appear legitimate. How did Cashin get involved? Ivo pointed to the first transfer. Your brother received a commission. I stared at the number. Cashin was paid to bring investors to Dorian. So he knew. He knew enough. I felt my anger return. All those years, I had thought Cashin was simply irresponsible. He was worse. He had convinced our parents to keep investing because he was earning money from the referrals. But then I noticed something. The commission stopped. Why?
Ivo zoomed in.
Because Dorian stopped paying him. When? 4 months before your parents lost the final amount. So Cashin stopped making money. Correct. And that's when he disappeared? Apparently. I leaned back. Then why did he keep telling my parents to trust Dorian? Ivo looked at me. That is the question. That afternoon, Mara and I met at a small diner near the courthouse. She had located Cashin. He was staying at a motel 2 counties away under his middle name. I drove there with her. Cashin opened the door after we knocked. He looked nothing like the brother I remembered. His beard had grown out. His clothes were wrinkled. There were dark circles beneath his eyes. He looked at me. Stella. I stepped inside. You have 5 minutes. He nodded. Mara remained near the door. I placed the photograph of the 12 houses on the table. You knew about these? Yes. You knew my house was listed? Yes. You knew Mom and Dad were trying to use it? He closed his eyes. Yes. Then explain why your voice is on that recording saying you never agreed. Cashin sat down. Because I never agreed to what Dorian actually planned. What did you agree to? A loan. For a company. Yes. And the collateral? Initially, my company assets. Then how did my house become involved? Cashin rubbed his face. Dorian told me my parents had offered it. They didn't. I know. When did you know? After the first application. I stared at him. You knew someone was using my name and did nothing. I tried to stop it. When? 3 weeks ago. That's not good enough. I know. Why didn't you call me?
He looked at me.
Because Dorian threatened you. I laughed bitterly. He was already threatening me.
I didn't know that.
You knew enough. Cashin lowered his voice. He had information about all of us. What information? Tax records, business accounts, personal documents. Where did he get them? From us. I froze. From you? Cashin nodded. I gave him my records when I signed the first loan. Mom gave him hers. Dad gave him his. And my documents? I don't know how he got those. I knew.
Mom.
I could still hear her saying, I only looked once. Cashin reached into his jacket and placed a small flash drive on the table. This is why I disappeared. What is it? Copies of Dorian's internal records. I looked at Mara. She took the drive. Where did you get this? I worked for him, Cashin. I know. He swallowed. I was trying to get out. By stealing his records? By protecting myself. Mara looked at him. What does he have against you? Cashin hesitated. Then he answered. I forged 3 investor reports. I stared at him. You lied to investors. Yes. You lied to Mom and Dad. Yes. You helped Dorian. Yes. And you still expect me to believe you're helping now?
No.
That answer surprised me. I expect you to believe the documents. He looked at Mara. Open the folder marked Lauren. She connected the drive to her laptop. There were dozens of files. Contracts. Payment records. Scanned IDs. Internal emails. Then one folder appeared. Property acquisitions. Inside were 12 addresses. My house was first. The others matched the photograph. Mara opened the first spreadsheet. There were columns for owner, estimated value, debt, and acquisition status. My house had one additional note. Family pressure sufficient. I felt my hands go cold. They knew my parents would pressure me. Cashin nodded. Dorian studied families before targeting them.
How?
He had people collect information. What kind of information? Who had money? Who had dependent parents? Who had family businesses? Who was divorced? Who was desperate? I looked at the screen. This was not random. It was organized. Then I saw something that made me stop. The acquisition status beside my house had changed. Pending had been replaced with escalate. What does that mean? I asked. Cashin's face changed. It means Dorian thinks you're refusing. I am refusing.
No.
You don't understand. He pointed to another column. After a target refuses voluntary collateral, Dorian moves to the second strategy. What strategy? Make the owner look financially unstable. Mara leaned forward.
How?
Cashin opened another file. There were fabricated complaints, altered payment records, and false notices. Ivo had warned me that the lawsuit could be coming.
Now I understood why.
Dorian wasn't trying to prove I had willingly pledged my house. He was trying to create enough financial chaos that a court might believe I was unable to keep it. Then my phone rang. It was my bank. The manager sounded nervous. Ms. Lauren, we have a problem. What happened? Someone has submitted a new application using your identity. My stomach dropped. A loan?
No.
What then? A request to freeze your mortgage account due to alleged fraud. I looked at Mara. Who submitted it? The manager hesitated. A law firm representing Northvale Capital. The call ended. I could barely breathe. Dorian had changed tactics. He could not take my house through a legitimate lien. So he was going to make my ownership itself look suspicious. But there was another file on the flash drive. One that Cashin had not mentioned. I opened it. It was an email dated 4 months earlier. The sender was Dorian. The recipient was my mother. The subject line read, Final option. The message contained only 3 sentences. If Stella refuses to cooperate, tell her the truth about Cashin. If she still refuses, release the evidence. And if that fails, use the house. I read it again. Then I saw the attachment. It was a bank statement belonging to Cashin. The account showed a transfer of $82,000. The recipient was not Dorian. It was my name, Stella Lauren. I had never received that money. Mara stared at the screen. That changes everything. I looked at Cashin. What did you do with the $82,000? He shook his head. I never sent it to you. Then who did? He looked at the file. I don't know. A second email appeared underneath the first. It had been sent 1 day later. Dorian had written, once Stella sees the payment, she will understand why she has no choice. I felt the room close in around me. Someone had created a financial trail connecting me to money I had never touched. And if Dorian could convince a court that I had accepted $82,000 from Cashin, my refusal to surrender the house could be made to look like part of a larger fraud. For the first time, I understood what Dorian's real weapon was. He did not need to steal my house. He only needed to make everyone believe I had already agreed to give it away. Mara closed the laptop. We need to find where that money went. Cashin stood. I know where to start. Where?
He looked at me.
My parents' house. I frowned. Why? Because that money never went to you. He took a breath. It went to Mom. The $82,000 had never entered my account. But according to the records, it had. That was enough to make me dangerous to Dorian. Mara drove behind me to my parents' house that evening. Cashin followed in a separate car. Nobody spoke much during the drive. I kept thinking about the bank statement. Stella Loron. $82,000 received. The name was mine. The account number was not. I had never seen the account before. When we arrived, my father was standing in the driveway. He looked at the police vehicle and immediately understood that something had happened. What is this about? I held up the printed statement. Where is Mom? She went to the pharmacy. Call her. Dad frowned. Stella, what's going on? Someone used my name to move $82,000.
His face changed.
What? I handed him the statement. He read it twice. Then he looked at Cashin. You know about this? Cashin shook his head. I just found out. Dad's voice became angry. What did you do? Nothing. You expect me to believe that? I expect you to look at the records. Mara stepped forward. Mr. Loron, we need access to the financial files your wife kept here. Dad looked at me. She kept everything in the study. We entered the house. The study smelled like old paper and coffee. Mom had always kept tax folders in a locked cabinet beside the desk. Dad opened it. The cabinet was nearly empty. She moved everything, he said. When? Yesterday. I stared at him. Why? I don't know. Cashin walked toward the desk. There. He pointed to a small envelope behind a stack of books. It had my mother's handwriting on it. My name was written across the front. I opened it. Inside was a bank statement from a private account. The account holder was Mireille Loron. The balance was $82,417. I looked at Dad. Why does Mom have $82,000? He shook his head. I didn't know. The statement showed a transfer received 4 months earlier. The sender was listed as a company I recognized. One of Dorian's shell companies. But the transfer description said, Property Consulting, Stella Loron. My hands tightened around the paper. They used my name as the payment description. Mara photographed the document. This is important. I looked at Cashin. Did you know about this account?
No.
Dad sat down heavily. My wife told me all the money was gone. She lied to you too? I said.
He looked at me.
Apparently. For years, I had assumed my parents operated as a team. Now I realized they had been making separate decisions, hiding different information, and trusting different people. Then I noticed another document inside the envelope. It was a letter from Dorian. My mother had received it 2 weeks earlier. I read it aloud. Mrs. Loron, the remaining balance will be sufficient to demonstrate that Stella participated in the transaction. Do not transfer the funds until instructed. I stopped. Dad stared at the letter. What transaction? Mara took it from me. She read the next paragraph. If she continues to deny authorization, the account will establish a financial connection between her and Northvale. I felt a cold pressure in my chest. Dorian had not accidentally created the $82,000 trail. He had designed it. And my mother had kept the money. I looked at Dad. Why didn't she tell me? He answered quietly. She was afraid. Of Dorian? Yes. Or of what would happen if I found out. He didn't respond. Then the front door opened. Mom came in carrying a pharmacy bag. She stopped when she saw all of us. Her eyes went immediately to the letter in Mara's hand. You found it. Nobody spoke. She put the bag down. I asked, why did you keep the money? She sat on the edge of the sofa. Because Dorian told me I had to. You could have told me. He said they would accuse you. They are accusing me anyway. I know. You knew the money was being moved under my name. I knew the account was connected to you. That's not the same thing. I didn't understand all of it. I stared at her. You understood enough to hide it. She began crying. Dad turned toward her. Why didn't you tell me? I thought I could fix it. By yourself? Yes. Dad looked devastated. What did Dorian promise you? Mom wiped her face. He said if I cooperated, he would remove Cashin's debt. I looked at Cashin. His expression was hard. He lied. Mom nodded. He told me the debt would disappear. How much was Cashin's actual debt? She hesitated. 340,000. Cashin shook his head. That can't be right. Mom looked at him.
It was.
Dorian told me I owed 190. He lied to you too. Cashin sat down. For a moment, nobody spoke. The entire structure was becoming clear. Dorian had told Cashin one number. He had told my parents another. He had told lenders a third. Then, he created false transfers to make each person appear responsible for money they had never received. Ivo arrived 20 minutes later. He reviewed the documents at the kitchen table. This is enough to challenge the alleged payment to Stella. Can it clear my name? I asked. Not by itself. Why not? Because someone could still argue that you authorized your mother to receive the funds on your behalf. I never did. I know. But a court needs proof. Mara placed another document on the table. We may have it. She had requested records from the bank where my mother's account was held. The deposit had not come directly from Northvale. It had passed through 3 accounts first. The final sender was a company called Belmere Property Advisory. I had never heard of it. Ivo searched the registration. His expression changed. What? The registered agent. He showed me the screen. It was my mother's name. I stared at it. Mom looked horrified. I never created that company. Apparently someone did. When? 4 months ago. I felt a strange mixture of anger and relief. The company was fake, but it was registered using my mother's identity. Dorian had not only fabricated my connection to the money, he had fabricated an entire business around my family. Mara immediately called the state fraud unit. While she was speaking, I noticed Cashin looking through the documents. He stopped at one page. Wait. What? He pointed to the registration. Belmere Property Advisory wasn't created by Dorian. How do you know? Because I recognized the filing service. Who used it? He shook his head. I don't know. Ivo looked at him. You said you recognized it. I used the same service. For which company? Cashin swallowed. My transportation company. Silence. I stared at him. You registered this company?
No.
But you recognize the service. Yes. Who introduced you to it? Cashin looked toward Mom. She lowered her head. Dorian's assistant. Name? Mom whispered. Celine Armitage. Ivo wrote it down. Mara returned to the room. Who is Celine? Cashin answered. Dorian's operations manager. Where is she? Nobody knew. Then my father's phone rang. He checked the screen. It was an unknown number. He answered. Hello. A woman's voice spoke. Even through the speaker, I recognized the name immediately. Celine. She said, tell Stella to stop looking for the money. My father put the call on speaker. I stood still. Celine continued. You are looking in the wrong place. I asked, where should I look? There was a pause. At your own house. What does that mean? The money was never the point. Then what was? She took a breath. Dorian wanted access to something inside your property records. What? I don't know. You expect me to believe that?
No.
Her voice became quieter. I expect you to understand that Dorian has been looking for one document for more than a year. What document? I never saw it. Then why did you call me? Because I found out what happens to people who refuse him. The line went silent. Then she added one final sentence. Your parents aren't the only people who are supposed to lose their house. The call ended. Mara immediately tried to trace the number. Nothing. I looked at my father. What document is inside my property records? He shook his head. I don't know. Ivo asked whether I had ever inherited anything connected to the house. I thought about it. The house had belonged to me from the day I bought it. There was only one unusual thing. Before I purchased it, the property had belonged to an elderly woman named Corinne Vale. She had sold it through a private estate transaction. I had never met her, but I suddenly remembered something from the closing documents. A handwritten condition had been attached to the original deed. I had never understood why. I called the title company. The clerk searched the archived file. Then she said, Ms. Lauron, there is a supplemental document attached to your deed. What does it say? I can't read it over the phone. It's restricted. Why? Because it was filed under a sealed estate instruction. I felt my pulse rise. Who placed the instruction? She hesitated. Corinne Vale. The same surname as Dorian. I looked at Mara. She immediately understood. Is she related to Dorian? I asked. The clerk answered carefully. I can't disclose that. I ended the call. My house suddenly felt different. Not because I was afraid someone would take it, because I realized Dorian might never have wanted the house itself. He might have wanted whatever had been attached to its history. That night, I returned home with Mara and Ivo. We searched the property records again. Buried inside the original closing file was a sealed reference number. It led to a document filed 22 years earlier. The title was simple: Private Transfer Instruction. I opened the scanned page. At the bottom was a name, Corinne Vale, and beneath her signature was a sentence that made me stop reading. If this property ever passes to Stella Lauron, the document must remain sealed until the rightful claimant comes forward. I looked at Ivo. Rightful claimant. He nodded slowly. Then Mara noticed the date. 22 years earlier. I was 12. I had never even known this property existed. Someone had connected my name to this house long before I bought it. And Dorian had spent the last year trying to discover why. The document in my deed was 22 years old, but my name was already written into it. I kept staring at the scanned page while Ivo read the final paragraph. If this property ever passes to Stella Lauron, the document must remain sealed until the rightful claimant comes forward. I said, I was 12 years old. I know. I didn't own the property.
No.
Then why was my name there? Nobody answered. Mara finally said, we need to find Corinne Vale. The problem was that Corinne had died 14 years earlier. Her estate records were scattered between Belmere County and a neighboring jurisdiction. Ivo requested the probate file while Mara searched for any connection between Corinne and Dorian. By noon, we had an answer. Dorian Vale was Corinne's grandson. I felt my stomach drop. So, this was never about Cashin. No, Ivo said. Then why use Cashin? Because Cashin gave him access to your parents. I looked at the deed again. What did Corinne leave behind? We don't know yet. That afternoon, we drove to the county archive. The building was old but well maintained. An archivist named Nessa Quill brought us the sealed estate box after Ivo showed her the court authorization. Inside were property records, correspondence, photographs, and several handwritten notes. One photograph caught my attention. It showed Corinne standing beside a younger man. I recognized him immediately.
Dorian.
He was perhaps 25. Beside him stood a woman I had never seen. I turned the photograph over. There was a date and one sentence. Dorian must never know what was entrusted to Stella. I stared at it. What was entrusted to me? Nessa pointed to another envelope. It had my full name on it. The envelope was addressed to me, but it had never been mailed. Ivo carefully opened it. Inside was a letter from Corinne. My hands shook as I read. Dear Stella Lauron, you do not know me, but your family knew mine before you were born. Your mother may never tell you what happened. If she does, she may not tell you the truth. I stopped. My mother. I read the next paragraph. 22 years ago, your mother came to me because she was afraid of Dorian. She believed he had discovered something belonging to my family. I looked at Mara. What? The letter continued. A financial ledger containing evidence of fraudulent transfers. I felt the pieces begin to connect. Dorian had not created the scheme recently. He had inherited it. Corinne had discovered what her grandson was doing. She hid the ledger. But why give it to me? The next line answered that. Your mother asked me to protect the ledger because she believed Dorian would eventually use your family to find it. I could not breathe for a moment. My mother had known Corinne 22 years ago. She had never told me. I kept reading. Stella was only 12. I chose her because she was the only member of the Loron family who had never benefited from Dorian's activities. I lowered the letter. Mara asked, "Does it say where the ledger is?" I continued. "It is not inside the house." I looked around. What? The letter explained that the ledger had been placed somewhere connected to the property, but not physically inside it. A separate document described the location. Ivo opened the next envelope. Inside was an old survey map. One section of the property was marked. The original house had been built over an abandoned municipal records annex. I knew nothing about it. I had never seen it. The structure had been sealed decades ago. Mara looked at me. Do you have access to that area?
No.
Ivo checked the property records. Apparently you do. The annex had been included in my deed. That was why Dorian wanted my property. Not for its market value, for what was underneath it. The next morning, we returned to my house with a county inspector. A section of the basement wall was older than the rest. Behind it was a sealed steel door. The inspector confirmed that it had been constructed before the house itself. I stood in the basement staring at it. Mara asked, "Do you have a key?"
No.
Ivo pointed to the original deed. Maybe the document tells us. The final page contained a small reference number. The inspector compared it with an old municipal key record. There was a match. A locksmith opened the door. Inside was a narrow room. There were no valuables. No cash. No jewelry. Only one metal cabinet. The cabinet was unlocked. Inside was a ledger wrapped in plastic. My name was written on the first page. Not in my handwriting. Corinne's. The ledger contained dates, names, account numbers, and transfers. Some entries were from 25 years earlier. Dorian's name appeared repeatedly. So did the names of other people. Then I saw my father's name. I looked at Mara. Why is my father here? She turned the page. The entry showed a payment made to Oren Loron. The amount was $14,000. The date was 23 years ago. I was 11. My father had never mentioned it. Then another entry showed my mother's name. $9,500. Same year. I felt sick. Were my parents involved? Mara said, "We need to understand the context before assuming anything." The next pages answered part of it. The payments were labeled protection. My parents had apparently received money from Corinne to protect documents from Dorian, but there was a second column. Recipient responsibility. Beside my mother's name was one word.
Guardian.
I looked at Ivo. What does that mean? He turned another page. The explanation was written in Corinne's handwriting. Mireille has agreed to protect Stella until she reaches adulthood. She must never disclose the location of the ledger to Dorian. My mother had known. She had been protecting the secret for years, until Dorian returned. Then she broke. I suddenly understood why she had been so desperate to control my house. She had not only been trying to save Cashin. She had been trying to prevent Dorian from discovering what was hidden on my property. But she had made the situation worse by giving him my records. The betrayal was more complicated than I had imagined. My mother had protected me once. Then she betrayed me later. That did not excuse what she had done, but it explained why she had been terrified. Then Cashin noticed something. He was standing near the doorway, reading over Ivo's shoulder. There's another name. He pointed to an entry. Celine Armitage. Her name appeared beside several transfers. I remembered her warning. She had told us the money was never the point. Now I understood. She knew about the ledger. Dorian was searching for it. Ivo turned to me. This ledger could expose the original fraud. How many people? Dozens.
And Dorian?
Potentially finished. I looked at the final page. There was one last note. Corinne had written, Dorian will eventually discover the ledger exists. If he does, he will attempt to obtain the property through financial pressure rather than direct theft. He will convince the Loron family that surrendering the house is the only way to survive. I stared at the words. She had predicted everything. The loans, the family pressure, the forged documents, the attempt to make me look financially unstable. 22 years earlier, Corinne had understood exactly how Dorian operated. Then I saw the final sentence. If Stella refuses, she must know that refusal alone will not protect her. She must expose the ledger publicly. I looked at Mara. What does that mean? It means keeping this secret may be more dangerous than releasing it. Ivo nodded. If the ledger becomes evidence, Dorian loses his leverage. And my parents? They'll have to answer for what they did. I knew that. For the first time, I was not thinking about protecting my family from consequences. I was thinking about protecting the truth from my family. That evening, I met my parents at a public library. I placed copies of the ledger on the table. Mom stared at the first page. Her face went pale. You found it? Yes. Dad looked at her. You knew? She nodded. How long? 22 years. Dad looked devastated. You never told me. I was trying to protect Stella. I shook my head. You were trying to protect the secret. She looked at me. Both.
No.
I pushed the ledger toward her. If you were protecting me, you would have told me before someone tried to take my house. She started crying. I thought I could handle it. You couldn't. I know. Dad looked at the ledger. What happens now? I answered before anyone else could. The truth comes out. Mom reached for my hand. I pulled mine back. Not because I wanted revenge. Because trust had to have consequences too. The next morning, I delivered the ledger to investigators. Within 48 hours, warrants were issued. Dorian was arrested at a train station outside the city. Celine surrendered voluntarily and agreed to testify. The investigation uncovered years of fraudulent transactions. The 12 properties were protected. The false debts were challenged. My parents' financial losses were real, but the $580,000 they believed they had lost on cash-in was not what they thought. A large portion had been stolen through Dorian's scheme. Cashin still had to answer for his role. So did my parents. Nobody walked away innocent. But nobody took my house. Months later, the court ruled that the fraudulent lien against my property was invalid. The fake $82,000 payment was removed from my financial record. The lawsuit against me was dismissed. My parents sold their house to settle legitimate debts. Cashin entered a repayment agreement and began working under his own name. Dorian received a prison sentence after the evidence from the ledger was admitted. And me? I stayed in the house. Not because I had won some competition against my family. Because it was mine. The final twist came nearly a year later. I received a letter from the estate attorney handling Corinne's remaining property. There was one final document. It contained a clause I had never seen. Corinne had left me a small inheritance. Not money. A letter. It said, "You were never chosen because you were the strongest person in the family. You were chosen because you were the one most likely to say no." I read that sentence several times. Then I understood what Corinne had really protected. Not the ledger. Not the property. My right to make my own decision. My parents had expected me to surrender my house because they believed family obligation would eventually overcome my refusal. Dorian had expected fear to accomplish the same thing. They were all wrong. I kept the house. I changed the locks. I rebuilt my finances. I stopped sharing private documents with anyone, including family. My relationship with my parents became limited but civil. Cashin and I spoke occasionally. He never asked me for money again. That was his karma. My parents had to rebuild their lives without using mine as collateral. That was theirs. Dorian lost the network he had spent years constructing because the person he expected to pressure into surrendering her home chose to expose everything instead. And my own reward was not revenge. It was something simpler. I could walk through my front door without wondering who had access to my name. I could open my mailbox without fearing another forged document. I could sleep in the house I had paid for without feeling guilty about keeping it. One Saturday morning, I stood in the kitchen where my parents had first told me to move out. The same table was still there. The same cabinets. The same window overlooking the street. But everything felt different. My phone rang. It was my mother. I answered. "Hello," she said. "I just wanted to tell you something." "What?" "I finally understand why you said no." I waited. "You weren't refusing to help us."
No.
"You were refusing to let us destroy you." I looked around my kitchen. "Yes." There was a long silence. Then she said, "I'm sorry." This time, she wasn't asking for anything. I accepted the apology. But I did not give her the keys. I never would, because the lesson I had learned was not that family could never be trusted. It was that trust did not mean surrendering control. My house was still mine. My name was still mine. My choices were still mine. And if someone ever asked me again to give up what I had worked for, because they called it family duty, I already knew exactly what I would say. Not ever.